Freedom of speech has risen to become a profoundly contentious issue within current political discourse. Jordan Peterson's fight against Bill C-16, the deplatforming of social media for conservative and right-wing populists, targeted campaigns to pull ads from political commentators. It's safe to say that there are fundamental disagreements about the nature of free speech and where the line is when encroaching on it. After thinking about this for quite some time, I have come to an opinion that I think is most likely extremely unpopular, particularly online, but I believe it could be of some use to share. For most of my life, I have been an advocate for freedom of speech, and it seems like this is the default position to take. Now, on the surface, this stance seems great. Everyone can voice their opinions freely without persecution from the government. Conceptually, this seems really good. It's a pillar in which some of the best societies are propped up on. And while I agree that free speech is a tremendous net positive and countries that have freedom of speech embedded are better societies to live under than those without, I have now realized that there are some inherent flaws with that original perspective that we need to attempt to mitigate if we want to construct a better society. Since putting more thought into this issue, I've come to the conclusion that there are certain types of speech that has marginal or even no benefit to humanity and only seems to create negative outcomes when promulgated. This type of speech should not only be disincentivized with social pressures, but the people proclaiming it should be deplatformed from all places where this pernicious speech can be spread. For example, obvious types of this speech would include things like factually inaccurate medical information, i.e. anti-vaccination propaganda, or even promoting homeopathic medicines over traditional treatments. Both of these have the potential to create a demonstrably dangerous outcome in societies. In an article published in Nature by Heidi J. Larson, it states that I predict the next major outbreak, whether of a highly fatal strain of influenza or something else, will not be due to a lack of preventive technologies. Instead, emotional contagion, digitally enabled, could erode trust in vaccines so much as to render them moot. The deluge of conflicting information, misinformation, and manipulated information on social media should be recognized as a global public health threat. Also, in a study published by Dr. Arthur Kaplan, a professor of bioethics at New York State University, it says, in 2014, a large measles outbreak swept through the Disneyland theme park in California, infecting over 50 people. Several of the children who initially spread the disease were intentionally left unvaccinated by their parents. Outbreaks such as this one in the Disneyland theme park are becoming increasingly common due to the failing vaccination rates. Undoubtedly, anti-vaccination groups contribute to the drop in vaccination compliance and anxieties concerning vaccinations. These groups often have a strong presence on social media and well-developed websites that attract people to their cause, but these sites have drawn very little critical attention. There is and will inevitably continue to be a child which, through no fault of their own, will be subjected to extreme medical health issues that may possibly result to be fatal solely from their parents' choice not to vaccinate them because of the misinformation being spread and their susceptibility to that speech. Now, a common argument that is constantly touted is that free speech is a human right and therefore would be immoral to restrict it. I strongly disagree, probably because I have a fundamentally different conceptualization of how we should value subjective moral claims. For me, the end goal is to construct a society that has the best possible outcomes and produces the most well-being for the greatest number of people. I would label my normative moral position as an act utilitarian. I don't judge an action under some set of arbitrary rules whether something is moral or immoral. I look at the outcomes it produces and the effects it causes to determine whether it is moral or immoral. So when talking about free speech, I don't just unconditionally and perpetually appeal to free speech regardless of the negative outcomes it causes. I look at free speech and see, well, generally for most purposes, the freedom to say what people want most of the time leads to better outcomes. But obviously not all speech does this, so why not maximize its utility and mitigate the speech that causes these bad outcomes? I don't view free speech as an end, like by having free speech, let's pack up and go home. No. I look at free speech as a tool that we can utilize to create the best possible society, but obviously it has some flaws, and we shouldn't just ignore them and unconditionally appeal to it as a principle, when that principle can in some instances literally cause demonstrably bad outcomes in society. For me, I like to view freedom of speech the same way that I view capitalism, which is as a mechanism that is supposed to serve humanity to facilitate in formulating the best society. I am a proponent of capitalism as an economic structure because it normally creates a better economic environment for the most amount of people and usually provides the greatest economic prosperity for countries that employ it. But obviously it has some major flaws in some instances, and the goal should be to try and fix those flaws if markets and capitalism does not address them. I mean, just look at the current state of the American healthcare system at the moment. You have millions of people who don't have access to healthcare, They pay nearly twice as much as comparable countries with socialized healthcare structures, with worse healthcare outcomes in a lot of metrics and only a marginal increase in some metrics. Also, they can't negotiate for drug prices effectively because it is legislated that way, and there is no collective bargaining power that a single payer system would fix. This flaw in the healthcare market then obviously raises the premiums, which then leads to less people having access to health insurance because they've been priced out. And it looks like there is no foreseeable future out of this tragedy because it has been lobbied that way, specifically to maximize profit incentives. No other comparable Western country does this. This hyper-capitalism at the cost of human lives, it doesn't happen. It's obscene. It doesn't make sense to me to just perpetually and unconditionally appeal to capitalism in a specific area. Again, let's maximize its utility, i.e. free trade, integration of markets, but also simultaneously mitigate the issues that arise from the capitalism structure, i.e. the healthcare system in the US, or even getting rid of the privatization of prisons, which because of the profit incentive to collect the subsidy from housing inmates leads to an increase in the inmate population, and it doesn't really focus on rehabilitation, which should be the main goal. But their goal is to cut costs, cut staffing, cut programs, cut conditions as much as possible, which inevitably ends up increasing recidivism rates, which then further negatively affects society by obviously the higher crime rate, but even the tax dollars then going to house those inmates. This cycle is ultimately due to the maximization profit mindset. It's not logical to always appeal to a conceptual principle over the tangible outcomes that directly cause great harm to people's lives. Circling back to free speech, the certain types of speech that ought to be curtailed don't only have to directly cause negative outcomes for physical health, it can also be softly contributing to negative outcomes in other aspects. When you have bad faith actors who deliberately promote misinformation or conspiratorial content with absolutely no empirical basis for their claims, where their goal is specifically designed to erode public discourse or to promote accelerationist ideas, this also raises concern. When you have someone like Alex Jones who willingly platforms the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which originated on 4chan and subsequently resulted in someone going down to Comet Pizza and started firing an AR-15, or when he relentlessly questioned and gave his theories of the events that took place at Sandy Hook, which resulted in the harassment of the parents who just lost the lives of their children. This confirms to me that maybe this speech should not be permissible. Now, this is incredibly hard for me to say because I see the tremendous utility free speech provides. I believe in it. It does a lot of good, but I think we need to start an honest and rational look into assessing certain forms of speech, and deferring to the relevant expert consensus on the matter is essential for that. Being able to openly disagree with someone you hold in political opposition is crucial and should 100% be protected. Now, for example, I don't know if we have the longitudinal studies to definitively make this claim, but if it were to be the case that the overwhelming consensus among psychologists and sociologists is that referring to an LGBT plus individual by their preferred pronouns greatly produces better outcomes for those individuals, then that's the right thing to do. And someone like Jordan Peterson, who puts principles before outcomes, makes it incredibly difficult to achieve. It just seems illogical to me to ride out on principles at the costly demise of society, especially when the goal for everyone should be to create the best society for the most amount of people. This is not easy for me to say, but I think it needs to be addressed. I'm not for nonchalantly censoring everything. No, only certain types of speech that cause demonstrably bad or even dangerous outcomes for people. Look, I have no attachment to my beliefs because my goal is to have the most truthful and correct position. If another position is more philosophically sound or the empirical evidence doesn't comport with my position, then I will instantaneously update my view. If someone in the comments or on Twitter can tell me what's incorrect about this take, or what I'm simply just missing, my mind's open, because I sincerely believe that inexorably shackling ourselves to unfettered free speech at all costs does not create the best possible society for the most amount of people. I'll leave you with this. Is humanity supposed to serve principles, or are these principles supposed to serve humanity?